Welcome to the intersection of city politics and everyday life. I'm Brian Lehrer. Nowadays, I'm often tempted to go with the headline, Trump to City, Drop Dead, a variation on Ford to City, Drop Dead, the famous Daily News front page in 1975 when President Gerald Ford pledged to veto any bill to bail us out of our financial crisis of that era. Has President Trump earned my new version of the headline? Well, he has torn up the White House agreement to half-fund a new rail tunnel under the Hudson. His tax bill hits New York especially hard. And what about Trump's crackdown on trade? Will higher tariffs on imports from China and elsewhere hurt New York businesses and drive up consumer prices here? China's president, Xi Jinping, just signaled some concessions, saying he'll protect our intellectual property and open China to cheaper imports from here and elsewhere. But does he mean it? And will Trump still impose the kinds of tariffs that could harm the economy here in New York? And the larger question, without Washington in our corner, can New York City prosper long run? For answers, we turn to Ann Lee, CEO of the new technology firm Coterie, an authority on China's economic relations. She's taught at Beijing University and NYU and is author of Will China's Economy Collapse? Kathryn Wylde is here as well. She is president and CEO of the nonprofit Partnership for New York City, the advocacy group which is comprised of the city's top business leaders. And Greg David is back with us. Greg's a columnist for Crain's New York Business and directs the CUNY Journalism School's Business and Economics reporting program. Welcome back, all of you, to the program. Greg, you wrote a column that said China's tariffs, if they are imposed, and the potential trade war won't hurt New York so much for now. Give us both halves of that.
Well, first of all, most of the tariffs China began with as retaliation apply to manufactured goods. So they're not going to immediately target consumer goods. That would be an issue because we are a big consuming city. Second of all, other parts of the retaliation that China has done is affecting agriculture. That's one of their major targets, not coincidentally because, of course, those states voted for Trump. And so American farmers, as there's been lots of coverage in the last few days, are really on the front lines of this tariff war. Now, what do we do in New York? Yes, we import this enormous amount of consumer products from China, but we don't make many things here, and therefore our goods are not subject to export. What are we big at? We are a services-based economy, media, financial services, tourism, and so far, nothing on that front.
We can sell some of that stuff to China?
Well, New York financial firms are all over the world selling their services. New York media companies are all over the world. As a matter of fact, you know, what's kind of interesting about this is Trump ran his whole campaign right about the deficit and bad trade with China. But he went to protect the people he hates most, right? In the media and the entertainment businesses. That's what intellectual property, when he says the Chinese are stealing our intellectual property, that's in large measure what it's about. It's very ironic.
Or he claims to hate the media as part of his media strategy.
Whatever.
But that's another show. And why aren't more consumer goods on China's list of possible retaliatory tariffs? In other words, we're hearing about agricultural products, things like that. They're not on Trump's list either in terms of what he would slap tariffs on their way into the country. But when we think about what we import from China as American consumers, I think the two things that people think of first are clothing and electronics, iPhones and the like. So why haven't those things been put on the list yet from either side?
Well, I think both sides are trying to start out small and maybe ratchet up more. And so the areas they're targeting, they're trying to minimize the damage to the overall economies of both countries. And so far, it's mostly rhetoric. And so I think that if they're to follow through, it's not going to be a massive part of our GDP. Clearly, if it escalates, it can get much worse. But initially, I think they want to try to get to a negotiated settlement and see if they can work this out. However, despite the conciliatory speech from Xi Jinping yesterday, I don't think that this is going to be a short spat, because the U.S. really is more concerned about China catching up from a high-tech position, and that's what they're really worried about. The whole Made in China 2025 is really what the Trump administration is going after, and I don't think China is going to really back down on that. And so, this may truly escalate into the services sector.
So the speech that you referred to yesterday by the head of China, Xi Jinping,
Right.
it was certainly taken by Wall Street, which went up hundreds of points, seemingly in response, to be a concession, to be maybe even a backing down from the threat of a trade war. Did he blink in a certain respect now that Trump showed how tough he would be?
Well, I think China has always said that they didn't want to engage in a trade war. They've consistently said that they want to negotiate and have talks about this. And the things that Xi Jinping talked about, like opening up the financial sector so that foreign companies can have ownership up to 51% of financial services companies in China, which was unheard of before. This was something that Xi Jinping had talked about before, and now they're just putting more meat on the bones. And so he may think that that's not necessarily a concession because this is something that he's talked about already. But perhaps the automobile, reduction of tariffs there may be a small concession.
Right. It still sounds different from a few days earlier when he's saying, oh yeah, you're going to put 50 billion of tariffs on us. We're going to put 100 billion of tariffs.
Right.
On
well,
you.
Remember, because Xi Jinping went to Davos basically having the same message that we are the one who's supporting the world global system. We want to support globalization. He wants to come across as the savior for the world and say that we're not shutting down
Right.
and we're not being
That
protectionist.
he's the Mr. International.
And that
now,
is the message he wants to get
if
across.
the United States is not going to be. Kathy, what's Wall Street's relation to this? What people see in the news or in their personal investments is wild swings right now, up by hundreds of points, down by hundreds of points on tariffs news, or at least tariffs rhetoric news. We've just heard that the finance sector is one of the big, quote, exports of New York, and certainly our finance companies are interested in doing business in China. So how rattled or encouraged or anything else are they by this as a sector?
Well, Wall Street and all the global headquarters companies that are in New York from various industries are all very concerned at any message that sounds like we're withdrawing from the global economy, because markets are growing in other places much faster than they are here or in Europe. So that's where we have to be. That's the next generation of our economy, and we'll either succeed or fail there. So it's a disturbing factor, and it's not simply tariff policies, but it's immigration policies and its attitude and its tax policy. There are a number of issues that are coming together to suggest that we are not as interested in being a global leader in a globalizing economy as we have been in the past, and that's a devastating message to our major corporations.
Are there leaders in sectors other than finance who are talking a lot that maybe hasn't made the press so much about implications for them from the New York economy?
Well, we have global real estate investors, obviously finance and insurance, the media industry, design sector. I mean, we're doing business all over the world. China is a particularly important market for everybody. So, no, there's a lot of concern. At the same time, there is enthusiasm about the Trump administration's efforts to make us more competitive on a tax basis, that our tax rates went from 35 to down to 21% for a business. That's a big deal. The repatriation, we were the only country in the world that didn't allow the repatriation of overseas profits on a reasonable basis. Getting that through the tax bill is, so you've got this balance where you see things, you see the markets and all that going up. So there's a real balance. So some of the messaging works domestically because it makes their business proposition to compete with global companies better. But when it comes to the tariff situation, obviously it's there's sort of no really good side of that.
You know, the markets, basically, ever since Trump's election in November of 2016, have decided that they're going to take into account all that's good and discount all that's bad. The tax cut did so much to improve corporate profits.
Deregulation.
Deregulation, these are all good for us. The saber rattling, the uncertainties, the turmoil, we're just going to ignore it. But they've also decided that they cannot ignore a tariff war. If there's anything the stock market has said, that they are fearful of the impact of a tariff war on doing it. So every time there's bad rhetoric, the market plunges. The next day, when the rhetoric is better, it soars. But it has told us that the market, which isn't the same as Wall Street and is a complicated mix of investors of all kinds, thinks an escalating international trade war would be a disaster.
Now, your article gave us some interesting stats that most people don't know about what New York imports, where New York imports from, and where New York exports to. Let's put that up. Here's the exports. So New York exports more value of goods or services to Canada than anywhere else, $12.6 billion. Then Hong Kong, which of course is part of China, $8.9 billion, and down from there. Can we put up that imports chart? This one is really striking. So if we export about $9 billion of stuff to Hong Kong, if that's a stand-in for China, look how much we import from China, $100 billion plus, and so far and away above the number 2 country that we import things from, Canada, at just $20 billion of goods per year. This is just, for somebody like me who didn't know these numbers until today, unbelievable. We get so much stuff from China compared to everybody else combined, it looks like.
Well, if you walk down any store, right, and look at where they're made in China. Of course, there wouldn't be any different in New York.
Try to buy
California.
garlic made in the U.S. in anything but a health food store.
So
we get garlic from China?
All of it.
So, yes, that's what we do. As a matter of fact, there's an even more little interesting quirk. When you go and look at what we import and what we export, the top 4 categories are the same: diamonds, jewelry, gold, and paintings. What this tells us...
You mean we're importing those things
and
we're
exporting them.
those
They're
things?
the top 4. Because we import the diamonds and we cut them, and we export them. We import the gold and we make it into other things and we export them. So we are adding value, but we are a transfer mechanism on that. New York is about consuming goods, but we are not in the goods export business. We have a dynamic economy based on other things.
And what does China see its future as, if you're talking about China 2025 as a concept? What is it that they're aiming to do by 2025, and how might that affect the United States, for better or worse?
So the China 2025 initiative is really about China becoming, I guess, a superpower in some ways, where they are also on par with developed nations from a technological standpoint, that they're also a leading innovator in everything from robotics to artificial intelligence and, pharmaceuticals. And they basically, would like to see themselves as, an important player on the world stage. How would this affect the U.S.? I mean, the U.S., if it basically chooses to work with China in a cooperative way, in the way that the UK and the US became friendly partners internationally, I think that it could be really beneficial for the world, because China certainly has added a lot of research into areas that has lacked funding from other countries. And so this could be really helpful, especially in alternative energies, for instance, because China invests far more than the US and pretty much all the other countries combined in a lot of alternative energies like wind power and solar and so forth.
You know,
Go ahead.
So I think that is a net positive. I think where a lot of folks in Washington see it as a threat is that China also would like to see their currency also become more available in commerce around the world eventually. It already is considered a reserve currency by the IMF. The US actually feels threatened by that because the US dollar is the dominant world reserve currency at the moment. And so that could be certainly a sticking point. And, you know, the US for, you know, the last few decades has been the leader in technology and innovation. And I don't think the US wants to lose that primacy. And
Yes.
so I think this is where we're going to see some, you know, increased tension going forward.
the future is so unknowable. All you have to remember is the most influential book on globalization from 20 years ago is Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat. That book argued that America's era was over and that the country that would assume leadership was India because it had hundreds of millions of well-educated English-speaking people. Where has all the innovation occurred since Friedman published that book? In the United States. Virtually everything he said in that book turned out to be untrue, turned out not to happen. India went into a great deal of difficulty. It's doing a little better now. All those English speakers turned out not to speak English well enough, and the call centers had to move to the Philippines. So the future is very unknowable. But the experience of my reading of The World is Flat tells me one should not underestimate America's ability on innovation and technology.
Interesting.
But we had a different immigration policy for the last
I
20
have
years
no
than we
doubt
have
that
now.
immigration, there are lots of policies out there that are crucial.
And the
Expand-
innovation economy is driven by our open immigration policies, and we're now losing that to Canada, to Australia, to other places because we're reversing that. And that's a key differential. So you have to put these pieces together. And while we were a magnet for global talent and welcoming it,
Right.
that fueled our ascension. Once we turn that off, and I really think for New York, for the country, that's a far more threatening policy long term than the tariff policy.
Even if we change our legal immigration priorities in the direction that Trump wants to change them, which is to say people with more education, more tech skills, more, I guess, pre-existing business acumen and ability to speak English,
Merit-based system.
merit-based system are favored in a new immigration system. Why wouldn't that select for those people who are most likely to be the business innovators?
Theoretically possible, but in fact, you don't know what's going to happen because it's shrinking the size. I mean, even a policy that's been put out there like refusing work permits to wives of H-1B visa recipients, which is one of the new policies. That has a devastating impact on the ability to recruit people. And companies are looking at this, companies in New York and in the States are looking at this and saying, to be competitive for global talent, we basically have to be in another place.
Can you explain the intellectual property issue and tell us if you think it affects some New York companies?
You mean the one in China?
The one in China, where Trump says maybe the worst thing they do to us is that they require companies that have technical knowledge to share their company secrets, really, with China
require
in order
a joint
to sell
venture,
there.
but the change in policy that Anne was referring to that was announced was they required a majority ownership by a Chinese company when somebody goes over, and so therefore they would share with their company that they were merging with
Right.
or joining with over their policies. And
So if an American company, under even the old system, wants to do business in China and sell some technology, some product based on a technology that's patented in the United States, they have to join forces with a Chinese
partner,
company.
and then their intellectual property is immediately compromised. they may lose the intellectual property and lose the business. And that's been a pattern that's happened, and that's part of the concern.
Do you have an example of that, Greg, by any chance? Can you name a company?
I think it's generally for everyone.
Yeah.
Now, here's the way it plays out. So American businesses are virtually all opposed to the tariff policy and the tariff war. But many American businesses are in favor of getting tough against China on these issues.
Intellectual property.
And we have been arguing about these issues for 10, 15 years and not getting anywhere. So there is a lot of business support for doing something about this problem. But the idea that this is how you do it is pretty much rejected by the business community.
How else could we have leverage?
You need to form coalitions with other countries. This is where the basic Trump trade and international policy falls apart. You need to have targeted restrictions on the Chinese. I think there's widespread interest in limiting China's acquisition of technology companies in the U.S. until there's a better quid pro quo. So it's not that this isn't a real issue. It is a real issue. The question is whether the Trump approach will get us anywhere on it. And like many things, just like you brought up with the immigration issue when you said, well, Trump wants merit-based immigration. I don't know if he wants merit-based immigration or just less immigration.
Both.
Similarly, in this case, does Trump really want to defend intellectual property, or is he just looking to do something about winning against China, since losing against China is what he hates the most, apparently?
And do you think China could give up this intellectual property demand that we've just been hearing about, requiring American companies who want to sell businesses based on their patented technology to share it with Chinese companies who could then also use it on their own?
Well,
because it sounds unfair.
right. So I would say that that may have been the case in years past. At this point, I'm sure that China would say, we're not making that a requirement, and
would that be honest?
Well, I think that this is going to be heard at the WTO, and so both sides will present their evidence of this. But going forward, I think that China has developed enough of an expertise that I don't think that they're going to see it as important if they don't make this, an important requirement of doing business there. I think they even announced that they don't require joint ventures anymore. So
Trump could declare victory and go home from a potential tariff war.
Well, I don't think it's so simple, because Trump has many instincts of his own, but he is reined in by the people in his administration. So he may feel and want, right, to say and do one thing, but then other people in his administration would give out a different message, right? So
the reined in is important here because he had been reined in by his advisors, but the reining in advisors on economic policy are gone.
Like on other things.
And the advisors who want to precipitate a trade war, who believe a trade war would be good for America, are in.
Right.
So actually, in this instance, the advisors are likely to fuel more, the ones that we know are there, are likely to fuel a war, not restrain a war.
Greg, why aren't we hearing more about tariffs on goods made by U.S. companies that used to manufacture things here and try to import them back into the country? In other words, when Trump was running, he was talking about how tough he was going to be on automakers and clothing manufacturers, the kinds of industries that used to employ a lot of non-college educated people at decent middle-class wages. And as we know, so many of those jobs over decades now have gone to China and Mexico.
No, he has, they're still negotiating the NAFTA deal and trying to dial that back.
Right.
And he's personally gone out of his way to make some companies squirm in terms of their overseas production.
Are they? Because that feels like, maybe it's media selectivity, but I feel like all I hear is how he's making China the villain. He's not making General Motors the villain or
Well,
Joe Blow
Amazon
clothing manufacturers.
There have been some villains singled out. For the car companies, he was very strong on bringing the plants back from Mexico. There's a new tax in the tax law. There's a 12% tax on the intellectual property of imports that was just put in through this tax law, which applies every place, including Puerto Rico. As
if it wasn't part of the United States.
Exactly, foreign imports. So there are, in fact, initiatives going on, which again are sending the message overall, if you take all these pieces together, for New York, which is very dependent on our relationships with the global economy, none of this is good.
That's true, but the thing he's running up against is that corporations have created global supply chains in which these cars assembled in Mexico, the parts come from all over. Samsung, one of my students just wrote about Samsung putting a washing machine plant in South Carolina, and the parts come from South Korea. Some people within this administration have understood that if he does try to do that, he runs the risk of really significant disruption that could lead to enormous job losses even in the U.S. So some of that is penetrating. But as Kathy pointed out, NAFTA is a big issue here. NAFTA is crucial on this supply chain issue in North America. Are they going to play it tough? Are they going to walk away from NAFTA? Are they going to just declare victory without making significant changes and go home? We don't know. The risks are great. And I don't know if if disaster is going to happen or they're going to slide through it without changes.
We've only got under a minute left. Kathy, is there a particular New York business interest in NAFTA?
Yes, in the overall trade agreements, absolutely. New York has a strong interest in that because we finance the transactions of everybody, of all the companies, and we are the center of that activity. And to the extent that it's reduced, made more difficult, that our credibility goes down. Edelman public relations firm in January at the World Economic Forum published a trust index that they do every year. And for the first time, trust in China is greater than in the United States.
And on that, we will leave it with food for thought about the present and the future. Thank you, all three of you. And that's our program for today. We are here each week, midweek at this hour at this week, the international crossroads of finance and politics, also known as New York City. You can also catch me on the radio weekdays from 10 to noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, will Paul Ryan, now that he's not running for re-election, hold Donald Trump any more accountable? I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.